Welcome back to Coastside Chats. I want to say episode 5.
I
Four,
thought this was
five.
episode 4. I thought this was episode 4. I'm
Um,
gonna go look at the YouTube.
I think we did 4. I
It's
think.
episode 5. Well,
Yeah. All
episode
right.
4
Cool.
technically because one of them was a follow-up, so it doesn't really count. But yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Whatever. Main episode 4. I took a break for a little bit. Just because I was busy with other things. And also Skylar disappeared for a while, and I was too lazy to find out why. And that was basically it. It was just like the most minor issue. Um,
Uh,
but I'm gonna do them consistently again. This might be multiple parts. It kind of depends on what we cover this time and if people have more they want to say. And like, I don't know. I always worry I'm not gonna hit the time limit on these things that I want to hit, and then usually that's not that hard. And usually there's more to talk about after I finish one episode, but maybe that won't be the case this time. I did a lot of research on this. I have a decent amount I want to say about kind of I don't know. I'm not gonna cover a lot of. I mean, I'll briefly talk about the main stuff that everyone like hears on TV. I don't really think it's important to cover that. I don't think anyone watches this for that reason. So what
I
I'll
hope not.
mostly be focusing on is the knowledge I've accumulated from watching a bunch of like various things, and so I'm gonna like basically briefly sum up a lot of the. I'm gonna spend the majority of my time doing this, summing up the like failures of essentially the Russian, like the entirety of the Russian assault, and why it failed and what the effects have been. That's mostly what I have laid out in my notes, and I think I can sum it up better than you would hear on the news and stuff. Just because I've consumed a lot of different news for many weeks since like the beginning of this. So, and then I'll have people talk obviously throughout like I always do, and we might
Yay.
tangent or whatever off of that. But that is in principle what I have set up for this episode. So, yeah, here let me open up my little Google Doc for it. I have a bunch of bullet points. I actually like have figured out how to use Google Docs fairly well for the purpose of me doing
It's
little
like the
notes.
the least impressive thing you've ever said.
I could have done this a long time ago. It's not like I had to research how to do Google Docs, but like
Are you sure?
I have gained efficiency on Google Docs. All right,
Okay.
but and there was a lot I didn't get to put into notes, and I will likely forget it unless it's brought up. But I have a decent amount laid out. So so to start it out, everyone knows about Russia invading Ukraine. The main reason for this being is that Putin is kind of like he kind of views himself like a king or more or less an emperor. And so not only is he like a dictator, but he has like very like large goals, not necessarily realistic, but he really enjoys viewing the Russian like country as more of what it used to be as a Russian empire. And I think a lot of his like personality and ego revolves around him wanting to become this man who is rebuilt and enlarged Russia and is seen as this like great I guess leader, who has furthered the nation of Russia from what happened, because he views the breakup of the USSR as the single like greatest tragedy of the 20th century, as compared to like the Holocaust and stuff. So he has very grandiose opinions on the importance of Russia and the USSR and that kind of thing. So he has for many years been trying to build up like essentially like he's been trying to wedge a lot of unification in the West, so that he can push for more like gaining back of what he feels was lost from the fall of the USSR. So that being like what he took in Crimea and stuff in like 2014 and before that. So that was like the main idea is that he has basically complete control over Russia, so he can choose to do what he wants, and what he wants to do is take control back of the entirety of Ukraine, and if he could, the Baltic states, which are NATO. They're in NATO, and so This is like his, I guess you could call it his first like large step in that process. So now that we have the idea of why he's done it, what essentially happened, or the three main like flaws that I have identified from the Russian push for control of Ukraine, um, are outdated technology and unequipment of the Russian soldiers. They have the second one is a large logistics issue. And the third is propaganda and morale. I'm going to start going through these bullet points, and Derek will check to see if anyone in my little Discord raises their hand, and we will tangent whenever. But until then, I'm just going to go through what I have written. So, first off, with outdated technology and unequipped soldiers, the world viewed Russia to have the second largest army in terms of manpower before this. And they viewed them to be a very strong nation militarily, a real threat to really anyone. So, obviously, the U.S. has by far the strongest military. And then I think my opinion and my knowledge on it definitely puts China as second. Now, I don't know, Russia and China might be a lot closer militarily than I perceive them to be. But as far as I'm aware, China is second behind the U.S. And they have the largest manpower of soldiers, obviously. And then Russia would be the third. And so, for, a long time since the USSR, we in the world has always viewed Russia as a very grave threat if they chose to, use their military. However, as we've seen with the invasion of Ukraine, they actually are very outdated in their technology. They use widely just stuff from about 40 years ago. All of the technology that they've been employing, besides for the most part, the technology they've been employing is a lot of USSR technology. It's not updated or modernized, and it's kind of funny because technologically, they have advanced somewhat alongside, China and the rest of the world. Obviously, behind the U.S. in terms of the bleeding edge of military technology, but they're not supposed to be incredibly behind. And so you would think that they would have a lot of these planes and defense systems and soldier capability that would be not largely behind the U.S. Or any other country that has a small number of forces that are well prepared. However, the Russians have not that at all. They have very outdated weapons. Their MREs, their meals, are 30 years old in the packages and stuff. They have very bad logistics setups with how they tried to do tank movements and stuff with refueling them. And so overall, it's been very funny almost to me to see how much of a facade their military actually is compared to what they were viewed as. So I think a large part of that has to do with them becoming more and more of an oligarchy. So, after the fall of the USSR, they had the oligarchs had control most of the power, and then with Putin to the rise of power, that only continued and strengthened in the oligarchs that he put in place. But I think what results from that, which this is known for general industry, is that a lot of the money is essentially leaked out of the economy into the pockets of these oligarchs. And I think a lot of that probably happens in the military too, because they have a decently sized budget. I think it's 50 million, or not 50 million, 50 billion a year. It could be more, it could be less. I'm not entirely sure. But it's a decent budget in theory. However, I believe a lot of that simply feeds into essentially nothingness. A lot of efficiency is lost as the money is just goes to random people's pockets who can get what they can get. And so I think a lot of it doesn't actually go to improving and manufacturing general technology, because they have their best performing jets are not incredibly behind or anything, and I'm sure they have pretty capable weapons technology, as far as I'm aware, and tank technology. But I think they don't have the money to manufacture that in mass. Because for the U.S., you see our Abrams tanks and our F-22 Raptors and stuff, and so you see these high tech planes and tanks and just vehicles in general, and you believe that to be pretty widespread throughout our military in terms of us having a lot of those high tech tanks and planes. But I don't think that doesn't seem to be the case at all within Russia's military. So I think a lot of the money is lost because of the system of government and the way their economy is set up. That would otherwise go to making the military as good as everyone believed it to be. And so I don't think that was as apparent to the world as it is now. But it's clear now that Russia's military overall is significantly weaker than it was believed to be. So, I touched on the soldiers using Soviet weapons and technologies. They're MREs, 40 years behind. They have very little food that is good. And so what's interesting is that the Ukrainians have a much smaller force. When it comes to their manpower and their general infantry, for ground troops, it's not super far behind what Russia deployed to assault Ukraine. I think it's hang on, I have the article, I can pull it up. So the Russian, this just describes the Russian army, I think, in general, and not specifically what they deployed. Based on, this is a Sky's news article. I'll link it in my description or something. But it says that there's a 280,000 Russian soldiers compared to Ukraine's 125,000, which actually isn't that large of a disparity because of the sizes of Ukraine and Russia. But when it comes to tanks and artillery and all vehicles and jets and sea vehicles, the Russian military has way more vehicles. However, as I just described, they're vastly behind technologically, which the Ukrainians use a lot of Soviet technologies. A lot of their soldiers just fire AKs, and a lot of their tanks and stuff are not super updated. However, because of the large amount of military firepower we've gotten in, and the rest of the world has gotten into Ukraine in terms of more updated technologies Javelin anti-tank missiles or Stinger anti-helicopter or anti-jet missiles. We've been able to pretty effectively arm the Ukrainians against a greatly more numerical force. So their vehicles from the 80s, the Russian vehicles, the Soviet vehicles, are not able to really be very effective against javelins, which are just, if you don't know, they're little handheld rocket launchers that one soldier can operate with minimal experience. And it fires, okay. And it fires a missile that goes, I think it can, I'm pretty sure it can hit the tank straight on. But what's more effective is it can lock onto the tank. It's a fire and forget, which means that you lock on to what you're shooting at, and it'll simply shoot the missile, and you don't have to worry about it. And so, like I said, I think it can directly hit the side of a tank. But what's more useful is that it can lock onto a tank and fly the missile directly above the tank and then come down straight from the top, which there's significantly less armor on armored vehicles on the top, making it incredibly effective. Now, as far as I'm aware, a lot of newer tanks and anti-personnel vehicles have technologies against that, like flares and disruption, to prevent these kinds of anti-tank missiles. However, because the Russians are using the Soviet technology, they can't really do anything. So the Ukrainians are being equipped with these defense technologies that are easily deployed and then very effective against them. And so the Ukrainians can use these technologies in guerrilla warfare tactics against the Russians, and they're having great success at destroying Russian vehicles. I'm not entirely sure how the Ukrainian tanks are doing against Russian tanks. I haven't really seen that covered. They're probably toe to toe in terms of like the technology on their tanks. So they're probably just generally like stalemating or losing because there's a larger number of Russian tanks. But but overall, the Ukrainians are having great success with their anti-tank weapons, and then they're having pretty good success in the air against the Russian air superiority with the Stinger missiles, which javelins can also fire against aircraft, but I think they're significantly less effective. But the Stinger missiles are meant to fire against jets and helicopters, and even older helicopters and jets have decently effective anti-missile technology in terms of flares and stuff. So it's not as effective as the Ukrainians are on the ground, but they're still destroying quite a few jets and helicopters. So they're slowly weeding down the technology disparity in terms of numbers, and because of the Russian technology, it wouldn't be as bad of a fight as people anticipated it being, because people thought that Russia would take Kiev by like the first day or two of the invasion, and here we are, and they never did, and they pulled out of the region completely. So that's the general ground disparity and what's happening there. Um, Next, we go to logistics. So essentially, which I have a bullet point that's in a different area that I think plays into this importantly, but yeah, because I'll include strategy in my logistics bullet point. But essentially, the Russians have had incredibly like stupid strategic moves. It is like unbelievable incompetence. The way of assault on Ukraine was very dumb for what they had. So they essentially tried a U.S. style attack, which is you attack from land, air, sea, multiple directions with a large number of soldiers and vehicles all at once. Now the U.S. is able to do this because we have a really large ratio of support personnel to every combat soldier. And so it's for the U.S. it's probably about 10 to 1. So 10, support personnel to every one combat soldier. So because of that, we're able to very effectively strategize our attacks from the ground up of every soldier to squad and larger and larger. And so we're able to coordinate our attacks very carefully and have all of the ground, sea, and air in large numbers working well with each other. However, the Russians do not have this number of support roles to combat roles. So they tried this, and you could infer that this is a large portion of why their logistics and strategy went so badly, is because they simply tried a bigger attack than they could. They bit off more than they could chew, and so you had a lot of like really dumb logistics, and some of this might be purposeful. If you want to theorize about it, there's a pretty decent chance that Russian officers and Russian higher ups specifically made callous and like stupid moves because they didn't support the invasion in general. But you had like 40-mile long convoys of tanks and stuff that would just like essentially get stuck. And it's just like, yeah, there's just like 40 miles of these vehicles that are like protected from the air, but relatively like unprotected in that, Ukrainian soldiers can attack them while they're stuck in a road for weeks at a time. And so you had multiple convoys like that. And then just generally their offenses were not very effective. They sent in Chechnyan special forces paratroopers into Kiev on the airstrips the first night to like take control of airstrips and try and like attack probably like military command, and they were like repelled. And so it was like they sent in a lot of special Spetsnaz forces and stuff on the first night. And then they were repelled because no Russian support ever made it that far in to aid them. And so apparently the Spetsnaz at the beginning of the assault were very angry about that because they sent in their forces and then they got repelled by the Ukrainians, and then they just never had any Russian support, and they had to retreat. But just general ineffectiveness of the military, and a lot of their logistics. They they they're like vehicles got stuck. They couldn't get gasoline up to the vehicles, and they weren't able to drive them. So you had that video at the beginning part of the war, where some Ukrainians simply drove past a Russian tank that was stuck. And the driver of the Ukrainian truck, went and talked to them, and he was like, yeah, what are you guys doing here? And they were like, oh, we're out of gas. And he said, and the Ukrainian driver said, oh, well, I can tow you back to Russia. And so it's just like, yeah, a lot of the Russian vehicles simply got stuck and weren't able to progress forward. Um, and the long convoys were attacked by the Ukrainians, and very just ineffectiveness in general. So, yeah, that's about it. The lack of food, that has existed within the Russian forces is also largely a logistics problem. But what has come from that is that Russian soldiers will kill and eat dogs, and they will raid Ukrainian supermarkets, and raid Ukrainian houses of civilians to get all the food that they can because their soldiers literally have no food from the Russians. The logistics aren't good enough to provide them with the bare necessities. So that also will contribute to my next talking point, which is morale. So yeah, and I think that's about all I wanted to say, for logistics and strategy. Yeah, and also chain of command seems to not be functioning very well within the Russian forces. So there have been quite a few times where Russian generals are having to move closer to the front lines than they would normally because the orders aren't getting correctly relayed. And so that's caused quite a few Russian generals to die in combat, which is not something you generally see in a war like this, from the Russian side. So I think it's 8 generals now have died. And
Yeah,
so
I
that's
was gonna
yeah.
mention that since I think it's kind of I think it's very interesting how much dissent there's, at least within the soldiers, supposed dissent. I mean, I believe some of that's probably propaganda, but like within the soldiers of the war, normally like whenever you have a war like this large, um the country tends to first figure out the propaganda and then send the war. But it seems like Russia kind of threw itself into this, just kind of assuming that its population would have its full support, but then it didn't get it, and then it messed up like a lot. Like the soldiers aren't cooperating, and as you said, the chain of command had to move forwards. I think it's partially because people are like intentionally like not passing on the orders or
Yeah.
not moving forwards when they're supposed to. So I think it's kind of I think it's very odd because you also see a bunch of videos online of like the of like the like Russian citizens like fully supporting the war and stuff. So it makes me wonder how effective the Russian propaganda has been within Russia, and how effective like what of what we have seen is Ukrainian propaganda, because we can't tell, right?
I think I there are there's definitely Ukrainian propaganda, but a lot of what is reported in Western media is filtered from NATO. So
Oh, that
NATO
makes sense.
generally does a pretty good job, and specifically the U.S. obviously is most of this, does a pretty good job of vetting their sources, and so they like a lot of confirmation on things before they report it, and then that gets reported then by Western media.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, because I follow to a decent extent Ukrainian media on this as well as U.S. media, and they like will report stuff ahead of time, and then it'll take a while to get confirmed by the U.S. and stuff and be seen on our media. But but yeah, that's true. Um, yeah, what I wanted to I had a bullet point that I like put at the bottom of my notes, which doesn't really make sense chronologically. But essentially, the U.S. had really good intelligence on this before it happened. So yeah, so something funny that came out of this was that people like Hasanabi, if you don't know him, he's a
Yeah.
Twitch streamer, a very popular leftist Twitch streamer, and other people, predicted that this was a lot of the stuff at the beginning was U.S. propaganda, um, because like a month before the invasion, we knew where they were. We knew where the Russians were mobilizing on the border, what they were mobilizing, their plans, and we publicized nearly all of that, which is like a very uh, unpredicted move, because normally, when militaries get advance notice and like information on stuff through spies or whatever, it doesn't become public. But what our military and Biden and our government chose to do was that we got a significant amount of information from probably our spies, but more so probably from informants within Russian military. I think this war, because it is mostly specifically Putin's doing, widely received on support from the military. So I think there was significant more leakage of information and battle plans and stuff to U.S. forces through the actual Russian military than would normally be the case. And we didn't want this entire offensive to occur in the first place, so we publicized it. We let everyone know what Russia was planning, and what they wanted to do and how they were going to do it and when about we thought they were going to do it. So it seemed very unreal to some people like Hasanabi, who thought it was almost a pretext for us to push NATO membership or whatever. And I think they thought we predicted that they would invade sooner than they did, which you can say they specifically chose to wait a bit because of us doing that, or you can just say we got it wrong. But we got essentially all of their mobilization and plans correct, like 100%. And obviously, the U.S. isn't publicizing all of our information. There's probably much more specific details we received that we sent directly to Ukrainian military for them to prepare in advance and be able to effectively fight against the Russians. But we knew about this way beforehand, and we made it public, which was like a very unique kind of thing to do and experience. And it happened exactly as how we said it would, in terms of how they attacked and stuff. And so there was that. And so because of that amount of information we got, it seems likely that there's a lot of unhappiness within the Russian military towards this invasion. And so there is probably a lot of specific choices by Russian officers and stuff to not carry out plans correctly, and to specifically bring down the Russian offensive. Now, I think that's happening probably less now because it's not really necessary, but at the beginning that seemed to be the case. But anyway, continuing with... Oh, wait, was there anything you wanted to say, or do I continue?
No, I've got nothing.
Skylar keeps texting me, but I only read it when other people are speaking, so I'll get to what you DM me later, Skylar. I read up through 3 of your messages. All right. So yeah, continuing on propaganda and morale. The Russians, as far as I know, didn't really talk about doing this at all. Even to their own soldiers. And so, these reports came out very early on. Soldiers were told a lot of different things, and the civilians were told even less. So a lot of the soldiers were told they were going on, what's it called? I can't think of the word, but they were essentially just doing training exercises. Drills and exercises, yeah. And so they were told they were doing exercises, and then they were deployed into actual combat, which would be honestly very terrifying, because you know how bad combat is normally. But imagine you don't even know you're going into it. You're going to a paintball match and your friend gets shot in the head. So yeah, that happened with some groups of Russian soldiers. Others were told what the actual media eventually began pushing to the civilians, being that they were going to denazify Ukraine. And so these Russian soldiers were told that they were going to go on this noble cause, essentially. They were going to help the Ukrainians, and they believed that the Ukrainians would be very thankful for their efforts. And so when they began to arrive in Ukrainian cities and were met with all this hatred and resistance, it was incredibly disheartening to these conscripts, because a large portion of the Russian deployment were newly conscripted soldiers. So these 19-year-olds, um, and so there was incredibly low morale. And captured Russians were allowed to call their families and stuff. But they were just like crying and stuff. There's like videos of them being just incredibly upset because they weren't ready for this. And so there was just general large unhappiness and very low morale within Russian soldiers. And then they didn't get the logistics very well, as I talked about. So they weren't receiving food. They were mostly stuck, unable to push forward, facing bombardment from Ukrainian artillery. And then, of course, they're in Ukrainian cities. So Ukrainian civilians began using like social media and their phones to call in locations of Russian soldiers, which would then get struck by Ukrainian mortars or just assaulted by Ukrainian soldiers and stuff. And so yeah, they just the Russian general soldiers were just enduring this like awful military situation for a month basically straight. Um, and so it's just very very low morale at the low level. And what this resulted in was I think one general was killed. One of the 8 generals that have died was killed by his own soldiers, run over with a truck. So and then I don't know. I haven't heard all the details on if that's happened to like lower level officers and stuff. I'm sure there were mutinies. And there were a large number of Russian soldiers were simply refusing to fight and push forward and stuff, even if they could. And then there were another large number of Russian soldiers who just like sabotaged their own vehicles and made it impossible for their units to move forward because they didn't want to have to fight. So yeah, what you have is this already horribly strategized and logistically set up invasion with these soldiers who are self jeopardizing themselves because of the horrible situation they were put in. Um, and hang on, let me look through these bullet points. You can, if there's anything you want to say, go ahead.
I don't really have too much to say here. Realistically, I don't think we're gonna meet much like counterculture to this
Oh
podcast.
yeah, no,
It's
this one's
basically just
mostly
like,
informational. I just wanted
yeah.
if anyone had questions or like opinions on the situation. I didn't think anyone was gonna. This wasn't really like a debate episode or anything.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's interesting how how conscription and stuff is going to work in the future, since as we're seeing with Russia, the overuse of conscription in certain areas is going to end up uh messing up like the war effort, since you're going to have no one who actually wants to fight.
Right.
Then and then again, most people aren't going to want to fight for the war if we compare it to like the classic 2000, not 2000, we're talking about classic like 1919 situation, where it's like people wanted to go fight because it seemed cool. Now we've got all this social media. Now we've got this internet. It's just like it's not a thing that people want to do because they know the reality of the situation. Then like how's conscription? How's the army gonna work in the future? I do think that's kind of interesting. Um, if you guys have any opinions on that, you can say that, because I don't know. I feel like functionally war, like man to man war, isn't going to be able to be fully sustained uh within like society soon.
Does anyone listening wanna
Keenan's
comment on that?
talking.
Keenan is. Oh, okay, cool.
Oh, I'm not gonna comment on what you said. But I also wanted to mention how absolutely poorly equipped the Russian soldiers were. Not like clearly everything they have was poorly equipped, but on the first wave, especially the on the first week of the attack, it was mostly just foot soldiers just trying to get as far as they can. Right? They when they captured about 20 soldiers on average, each soldier had about 2 magazines worth of ammunition.
Really?
Yeah, 2 magazines worth of ammunition, and some of the ammunition was rusted, since they use like copper pot or something like that for their bullets, and it was Soviet era, and typically those bullets don't rust unless you leave them out in like poor conditions, but they weren't properly stored over time.
Yeah.
So you had a ton of soldiers with just jammed guns that were just led to their death.
Yeah, and because of the logistics, there's no ammo coming for them either. So it's like once you run out of your
Yeah,
two mags, you're facing a resistance of people that outnumber you, and you're in their area, and they could just beat you to death essentially. Which isn't something that
and
I'm saying happened, but they were probably terrified of that fact.
and this is something that might get a little bit of controversy. Ukraine definitely still does have a Nazi problem though, but it definitely doesn't justify the displacement of like thousands and thousands of citizens, right? However,
I
the
mean,
Azov battalion,
yeah,
this is something. It's an important asset right now to Ukraine, especially because they're doing a lot to
which
fight off Russia.
for context, the Azov battalion is like, well, it's a battalion in the Ukrainian military, stationed in Mariupol currently, and it has a lot of Nazis in it, which is where this
Yes,
kind of overblown Russian propaganda comes from.
they say like 20% of them are Nazis, but it's probably a lot more. Um, uh, but I am kind of worried because we are like they are being armed with American weapons, and I don't like whatever happens if the war does in Ukraine's favor,
The
we are
uh,
going to have a group armed with very
the Azov battalion
dangerous
is
weapons.
not getting any aid actually, because they're in Mariupol. They've been besieged by Russia for quite a while because Mariupol is a city on the eastern side of Ukraine, so they got surrounded a long time ago. And no aid has been able to go into them, which I would have talked about this
Some of the
later,
Azov
but
battalion still stands though.
yeah, they stand in Mariupol. I'm just saying they get no aid from any Western countries or even from Ukrainian has gotten to them because they're in a besieged town. Town, I say, I
All
mean
right.
city of 400,000 originally. But yeah, I'm not really personally. I don't really worry about that. I think for the most part, Ukraine has that under control, and they'll fix that when they get to it. But yeah, it's like it was Russian soldiers, arriving in cities, or not cities. They didn't really get to any cities, but arriving in Ukrainian villages, and then in the outskirts of Kiev, in one of the suburbs known as Bucha, which had a lot of which was recently like uncovered when the Russians retreated. The world was able to see what the Russians did there. But one of the things that was described by the civilians living in Bucha was that when the Russians arrived, and they were knocking on doors, they would ask, "Where are the Nazis and where are your husbands?" Because they were just trying to find the Nazis to kill them, and they would kill almost all the men, execution style. They would tie their hands behind their backs, and then they would shoot them point blank in the head. Uh, and so that's the kind of denazification that Russia is trying to do, essentially. The soldiers, I don't even think, Russia has like there there's a lot of memory still existing from World War II of the Nazis and stuff and what they did to Russia. But I feel like a lot of these conscripts aren't aware of that, and I'm not sure they fully understand, the word Nazi and stuff. I think they don't really understand what Nazi is besides that they're bad people and that they're trying to fight against them. But yeah, that's where a lot of the propaganda comes from. Is that there are still a lot of older Russians, or not even older Russians. I mean, you could have like 50-year-olds or 40-year-olds that heard a lot about the effects of World War II and the Nazis on them. So it's a very effective tool that Russian state media can use. Okay, did Skylar want to say something?
So I actually have so going off kind of the World War II memories there. I think one of the reasons why Ukraine's strategy or Russia's strategy is so terrible going into Ukraine is their strategy seems to be mirroring what they did in World War II, which was just kind of throw bodies at Germany, and let the
Right.
United States and the rest of the Allied powers do the rest of the damage. But I feel like Stalin likely kind of rewrote history there and sort of wrote the United States and the rest of the Allied powers out of the impact that they had in overthrowing the Axis powers, which
That seems
is
reasonable.
likely why Stalin thinks that this throwing bodies,
You mean Putin?
or Putin, yeah, thinks this throwing bodies will work in Ukraine and in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from Putin probably fearing the result of informing the populace about this invasion and informing his soldiers about it. Like what the effect that would have. Otherwise, I think he. I don't know. I think yeah. Obviously, they weren't equipped logistically for it, which is a military command issue for those who already knew, you know about the invasion and stuff. Um, so yeah, there's definitely to an extent they didn't prepare well, simply failed as a military. But that's true that a lot of the inefficiency at the lower levels was simply overlooked by Putin. I think he just assumed that because of their I think Putin didn't he obviously didn't predict the American publicization of all the information. Um, and I don't think he predicted that the world and specifically NATO would be as unified against it um, as they ended up being. So he probably expected significantly less resources to actually go into Ukraine. But yeah, he also probably predicted that he would simply have the numbers and have a big enough military that it would just go over um, easily. But the issue is being a dictator. Very few people like to tell you the truth out of fear of you being angry. So, yeah, he likely didn't know how bad the situation was. He probably still doesn't really comprehend or hear about how bad the situation actually is. Um, but he just tells them orders and they kind of do their best.
Right. Yeah. And a little bit of a tangent about the American intelligence on knowing the Russia invasion before it happened. America's spy plane program is like absolutely absurd. Like back in 1966, you had the SR-71, which was a plane whose ability to be picked up on a radar was like the size of an eagle's eyeball and could fly at Mach 3. And that plane has not been able to be replicated anywhere else in the world to this day. And that was built back in '66 and declassified in the '90s. So it's very easy to or it's difficult to imagine what kind of whack ass shit they got right now if because they canceled the SR-71 program and one never got shot down in the 30 years of it being in service. So I'm sure they got some wild shit for intelligence over Russia that Russia either isn't aware of or can do absolutely nothing about. So
Yeah, I think that's fairly true in terms of like watching them physically like mobilize, which they released that. I remember I haven't like in preparation for this podcast gone back and watched stuff from that time from like before the invasion, but I remember vaguely seeing, they would like put photos on like major news of like the like satellite imagery or like high altitude imagery of physical mobilization of Russian soldiers. So we knew obviously from what you're describing too, besides what leaked from Russia itself. But yeah, yeah, no, our technology is pretty advanced for that kind of thing. I don't know what I don't have they talked about any the replacement for the SR-71 or what they employ in place of it currently, because I'm not really familiar with that, but I know about the SR-71.
not really, because they didn't even talk about the SR-71 till 20 or 30 years after it was in service. So we know of a couple spy planes that are being used right now, but they are nowhere near as advanced as the SR-71 is. So
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I'm getting close, relatively close to the end of stuff I have written down. But I still have quite a bit to talk about, I think. And then I'll just do whatever tangent more. But anyway, I need to speak louder. I don't know if that all picked up. So because of the propaganda, and the public not being well before propaganda for the most part, I think generally before the invasion, Russia didn't talk about them doing the invasion at all. I could be wrong about that. Maybe they did. They were already pushing some, but I think for the most part, um, the Russian populace didn't know that it was something that was going to occur. And so when they did invade, and some of the Russians began to get captured, like I described, they were given cell phones to use by the Ukrainians to call their family members. And so these family members were very shocked to find out that their children were not in fact like on bases and were in Ukraine. So it began to leak out as more and more Russians were captured, and it became a bigger event. And then after the breakup of, well, like during the end of the USSR, they already had, I forgot what the Russian word for it was, but they began to have more free speech and publicization of stuff and just media and news in general that was uncontrolled by the state. And so since then, in the last like 30 years, they had in Russia a decent amount of free knowledge and outside information. However, as Putin's been in power widely over the last 15 years, that's been slowly cut down more and more and more to be, closer to surpassing China and closer to North Korea in terms of the media allowed. And it's gotten to the point that with this invasion of Ukraine, the like final independent news sources and stuff were shut down. And so now it is essentially Russia is becoming, it's putting up a new Iron Curtain. Obviously, this will not work like it did before. I don't think it seems obvious that Putin isn't quite as clear on the technological advancement and the effects it'll have on him trying to employ this kind of media curtain that he did, or that not he did, that the USSR did for so long. But because of that, a lot of the civilians aren't aware of what's happening. However, a large, or not a large, yeah, I would say a pretty decent number of those living in large Russian cities, or those that are younger, have been able to hear about what has been happening. And so at the very start of the invasion, there were protests in major cities for it and stuff. And it wasn't large amounts of people. Like, it wasn't, because there have been opposition opponents politically to Vladimir Putin in the past. And sometimes when they've been, poisoned or imprisoned, there have been street filling protests in major cities. And nothing that big happened with this. But there were still widespread protests within major Russian cities that had thousands of people protesting. But there was widespread police crackdowns and roundups and arrests made against these people. So I think for the most part they've gone away now. I don't really know if anyone's still protesting, or at least it's not really covered. But yeah, that's what also happened was a few important Russian personalities, influencers, like the main talk show host in Russia. They spoke out against the war at the very beginning of it, and there was more like speaking out from important, influential people at the beginning than there is now. And I think most of those people have lost their positions, so I don't think that's happening as much now. But that's generally the state of propaganda, is that they're pushing the narrative that this invasion was a denazification. And they also don't refer to it as a war. They specifically call it a special military operation. And so a lot of Russians aren't aware of the scale and importance of what's going on. And those that do widely believe it to be a good thing from what they hear. And that's about all I wanted to cover. I think it's that probably breaks a little bit, especially within the families of those who hear from other family members that have been captured that call them back. And like I said, for younger populations, a lot more of them have VPNs and stuff and are able to easily bypass Russian control. But generally, most of the population, especially in not large cities, which is the wide majority of Russia, don't know about really what's going on, or they support it vaguely. is essentially the situation. I think that was all I wanted to say.
Jazz, are you gonna talk about the social media stuff?
What social media?
Like with
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess I will cover that now. So yeah, I brought this up because this was more of a discussion point than most of what I've covered. And I told Derek about it a couple days ago, and we like briefly talked about it, but not really. Um, but anyway, it's that a social. I don't remember the name of the social media company, or it's like it's not a social media company. It's a AI imagery recognition company that's like based in the U.S. I want to say, uh, is working with the Ukrainian government to provide Ukrainians with the ability to take pictures of dead Russian soldiers, and then they use facial recognition to find out who they are, and then they find that soldier's social media, and then they contact their family members and send them pictures of, the dead Russian soldier. And so this is a little bit of a controversy, uh, at least on Twitter, but I'm interested to hear opinions on it. So, what do you guys think about these? Oh yeah, okay. Skylar said Clearview AI is the name of the company. But yeah, what do you guys think about?
Oh, hey, I've heard that name.
Yeah, what do you think about the by the way the way the CEO of Clearview AI talked about it was really funny, cause like okay, personally I don't believe that them doing this is like an awful thing. It's not the best approach, but I don't mind it that much really. But the way the CEO put it is he put it like you would talk like any CEO would talk about like any other thing, where he was like, yeah, the Ukrainians are so excited by the possibilities of this technology and how they can explore using its capabilities. And it's just really funny to hear him like use those words, knowing full well that they're just gonna take pictures of dead people and send those pictures to their family members, as almost a propaganda effort against the Russians, in extent. And so yeah, that's the situation. I want to hear your guys' opinions on the
Um,
Ukrainians doing this.
I'm gonna say my opinion first, since I pretty much have it formulated since I said it last time. Um, I think it's kind of brutal that they're doing it, right? Like it's obviously like doing it in some ways is very scumbaggy. It's very like BM if I want to use gaming terms, but it seems like it's like it feels like within certain communities it might cause more rebellion against the war, and in certain communities it might cause more anger, right? If you have a family that's been fully propagandized, they're fully in support of the war, and then suddenly they receive a photo of their dead son, like that's just going to make them angrier, right? And I do think I don't want to say it's a good thing, because I don't think it's a good thing in particular to be able to do this, but I do think it's at least like it may have a positive influence in ending the war faster if it makes it so more people, more Russians specifically, who may not have access to uh unbiased media or uncensored media. I'm not going to say unbiased because I'm not like we don't really have that either, but uncensored media to compare their own lives to, that it might show them a side of the war that's a little bit more like, you guys aren't winning, everything sucks, but I don't like that it has to be done, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah, that's fair. I'll give more of my opinion now, and then I'll like force other people to talk. I'll
Force other
like
people to
hang
talk.
on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If Austin and Jake, and I don't even remember honestly who Mister. See, I okay for
That's
those
Brennan. Hey Brennan, what's up, man?
who.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, whatever. Um, yeah, okay. What I was gonna say is cause my dad. Okay, see, I read it on Twitter, and I was like, and I had a completely different interpretation than a significant number of people have had, and you, and then also my dad had the exact same interpretation, and I thought it was funny. So I read that, not seeing the like response tweet to it, and I was like, oh, this is great, because my interpretation of it was that these Russian parents aren't finding out that their kids are dying. because the Russians are widely and accurately reporting what is actually going on, in terms of like deaths and victory or losses. And they're also apparently not telling family members that their kids are dying and stuff. So I read that and I was like, oh, this is great because now families are able to at least find out that their children have died, because that's a pretty unfair thing to keep from people. And then I saw quite a large amount of people being like, no, this is awful because it's propaganda against Russia, which I'm sure that is a part of it. But I also I don't know. And then I told my dad about it, and he also was like, "Oh, that's good. That's really smart of them to be able to inform the families like that of their kids' death." And so, and I still hold that belief. Like obviously, and I think your perspective on it is very correct. Um, a lot of people seeing their dead kids or family members, or even if they weren't related and they didn't know that person, seeing a dead Russian soldier is just going to make them more angry towards Ukraine. And then I think you're right. In other instances where they aren't fully on board with the war, they might change their opinion more from it. Um, but I think I don't know how much. It's hard for me to estimate or guesstimate, I guess I should call it. How like important that was to the Ukrainians when they decided to start doing this, because I do believe a significant part of why they did this was simply to inform Russians and not simply to propagandize and bring about like unhappiness and insurrection almost. So I still think it's a good thing that they're doing it, even though it is really sad, that they have to go to the lengths of sending their family members pictures of their dead kid. But I mean, if they just texted them and said their kid was dead, I don't know if those Russians would believe that. So, what are you gonna do? Um, yeah, Skylar can give his opinion now.
So actually, this was the first that I've heard of Clearview. I didn't know that Clearview was involved with this at all. But knowing Clearview historically, just because they're a pretty big name, their CEO is Australian, so
Whoa.
L. And also they're like a super immoral company. Like
Oh.
I think they have
surprised.
they have active lawsuits against like 6 different countries, like the countries themselves currently,
Yeah,
because the way they
that was
collect.
it was
Yeah.
very bleak the way that CEO like had the wording for talking about working with the Ukrainians. But
Yeah, because the way that they collect their facial recognition data is they just scrape it from social media sites
Oh,
without the
jeez.
consent of the sites or the users. They just go in there and they grab faces.
I mean,
Pictures of
impressive.
faces.
Also, wow.
I mean, it's just like IBM, Google, and I forget the other company all called them out for privacy invasion. Which, like, if those guys are talking, that's a big deal. But so yeah, last I heard, they had a database of 15 billion unique faces
Sheesh.
that they were able to scrape, and that was like 4 months ago. So I'd imagine that's probably at least doubled by now. So yeah, that's my main problem with that. But
how does that just to this is completely unrelated and more curiosity. How does that work? How do you have 15 billion unique faces? Like when there aren't, obviously 15 billion people alive. This is like
Jess?
a misunderstanding with me understanding how facial recognition works.
Hold on.
wait, what?
Um
Not
how
like unique individuals. Sorry, did I
Just like
say
15
they
billion
have
faces.
like
15 billion
just pictures,
faces?
just pictures.
Yeah,
Okay, so
they
like
have
they're like
15 billion faces.
okay, so you could have like more
Sorry.
than one picture of a person and that would count as
Yeah,
okay, that makes
exactly.
sense. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. What's your opinion just in general on that, Skylar?
No,
Just no. All
you
right.
don't. You don't get to
All right.
just collect pictures of people's faces. That's
No,
kind
no,
of
no,
whack.
no, not
Clearview,
that,
not
not that. I mean
Clearview.
like on the Ukrainians sending the
Oh, like
pictures.
them. That's weird. I still don't like that. I mean, do Russians not wear dog tags?
I honestly
Well,
don't
I
know.
mean,
I thought that was a
considering
pretty universal thing.
considering that a lot of them are like, like they don't even know that they're going to go to war, right? I'm sure that giving them the dog tag, again, some of them, I'm sure that like giving them a dog tag would effectively imply that they're going. So I assume that might be something that the Russians want to avoid, at least a little bit. Right.
Yeah, I say no. Don't. That's weird as shit.
All right.
Don't do that.
Makes
Right.
sense. I do
Austin. Oh
think
wait,
that
no, continue. What were you gonna
I
say,
do
man?
I do think that like we do need to what are we talking about? I can't do anything. I do think that the issue of parents not knowing like whether or not their child has been KIA does need to be addressed, right? Because like I just saw a post on Reddit about like a Russian man who's like in support of the war, but his son is like a chef on like a ship, and he's gone missing, and he didn't hear about it until he like investigated on his own. And he discovered this ship has been like no survivors, and like he was just told that oh, he's just missing right now. He's fine. So like I do think that is an issue, and I wonder how obviously if they're not getting dog tags, if they're not getting something like that, uh, I wonder how we're eventually going to circumvent that issue of like who's dead and who's not.
Yeah.
I mean, at
That's
the
a
end of
good
the day,
question.
that's not Clearview's.
That's not Clearview's job.
Like, I don't know how that company still exists, dude. I thought they were getting sued into the ground, but whatever.
This is their time to shine. It's an opportunity.
Apparently,
Yeah. All right. Austin, what is your opinion on the Ukrainians doing this?
If Austin is here,
Mm.
oh, he's here.
Uh, yeah, how do I have, like, I don't really have an opinion, I feel like.
That's okay. If you don't have anything you want to say, you don't have to. Just.
Alright. Yeah, I do have, like, a question. You're talking about how, like Russia's not really using any, like, modern technology. Like, why is that?
Any what technology?
Like, modern
Modern?
technology?
Oh, like I
Yeah,
said, I think their funding is just bad. I hate you,
I see.
Skylar. Oh,
Skylar,
Skylar has
can
something to
you
say.
stop?
All right. Skylar was like, I think he was
I saw it.
researching
I saw
this.
it. I
No,
was
no, I
there.
know. I think he was researching like their. He got the budget of it being 60 billion, which yeah, that sounds right.
history's like the only thing I can do here. But yeah, their budget's about $60 billion, or which is about 1/10 of the American budget, and they also tend to use their scientists kind of suck because Operation Paperclip,
Say
America
more
kind of
time.
stole all the good Russian scientists.
Oh, actually, I remember now. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, which that went on until the 90s. So I'd imagine
Yeah, I
they're
remember
still
this.
recovering from that.
Yeah, and then
Cold
I,
Be-
War
I imagine
happenings.
a lot of Russians don't really want to work in Russia when they could work in the massive
yeah,
money pile that is the U.S. industrial complex. So
exactly. So yeah, the government bad.
yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do with the funding. Like I said, I think their most advanced technology isn't super far behind like U.S. technology and stuff, but I think they just don't have the money to like upgrade their military, and produce a lot of modern tanks and stuff and vehicles. I think they just oh, it is far behind. All right, this is yeah. All right, maybe I'm just unfamiliar. I'm jaded by playing Battlefield games and thinking that the Russian jets are nearly equal to the U.S. ones, which I don't actually believe that. But I didn't think they were super far behind. But no, Skylar says they're 30 years behind. They have like 12 jets. Thank you, Skylar. Yeah, no, I knew whatever their most advanced jet. I knew they only had like a few, and that's the issue. Is that the U.S. has like a massive amount of like F-22s. Like we come up with like a new plane every like 20 years, and they're all incredibly expensive. Um, F-35 cop, and then we make a bunch of them, even though they're expensive. And so I think a lot of people's perception of militaries is that whatever the bleeding edge is, that's what's deployed. And that's semi true for like the U.S. and for nations with small, high upgraded capabilities. But that's not the case for Russia. They just have a bunch of outdated stuff. Yeah, that's basically it. It's
Let's see.
yeah, they just don't have
Yeah.
money and technology, but mostly money. Really?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Oh,
Jake, you can press the button now, Jake.
oh no, he's doing homework.
Uh, well,
He said he would
he's
join when he's done doing homework.
okay. Well,
Keenan, did you hang on? I'm gonna invite Keenan up here because I don't. I think he might have. Keenan, were you here when I talked about the Clearview AI thing with what the Ukrainians are doing?
No, I
Okay,
left
okay.
because I had to eat food.
I'm gonna quickly summarize it for you.
Hmm.
Ukrainians use facial recognition to take pictures of dead Russians, and then they find out their family's social media and send them pictures of the dead Russian.
Is that out of torment or like
Exactly.
respect?
Exactly. Now
Uh,
you give your opinion.
uh, well, uh, hmm.
You
So
can have your opinion.
typically,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
typically, so the Russian people, they don't know what the fuck. Sorry, can I cuss? Sorry, they don't know what the
Yeah,
hell's
no,
going
you
on.
can cuss. I just don't personally
They don't know
cuss.
what the hell's going on with their kids, right? So I don't know. It's kind of gruesome just seeing like a dead photo of your child, like I don't know, just out of 2 months. But I guess that's better than no closure at all.
This is my opinion on it, so yeah, yeah. Keen,
But who's the
Derek.
one? Who's the one doing this?
Oh, I have to make Skylar come talk again. Who's the one doing this? You mean the company,
Who's
or
the
you
one?
mean
Oh, it's a company.
Yeah, Clearview.
Yeah, Clearview AI is the company that works with the Ukrainian
Did they?
military to provide this service.
Okay. Well, I think it's. I think they would argue it's out of good faith. I'm not sure if like it's kind of messed up, but I think they would argue it's out of good faith.
Well, the interesting thing is how they get the pictures, Keenan. They literally just scrape social media and they just take pictures of people's faces and they just stockpile them. They have like 15 billion and they're getting sued into the ground for the last year, but they still exist.
Yeah. I
But yeah,
mean, I don't know. I don't know about the history of the company. That sounds pretty messed up. But I guess in this case, they could argue it's in good faith. I don't know if they can get away with it.
right. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. All right, I think we'll come back to this again whenever Jake is done with his homework and he will give his opinion. Uh, or I guess if anyone else happens to join, Helen left. I'm very sad Helen left. I wanted to hear Helen's opinion on it. Helen's normally morally correct.
morally correct. Okay.
Helen is normally a good person, is what I'll say.
Can't believe I've been designated the morally incorrect person.
Morally incorrect. No, no, you're fine. But I think Helen's morally superior. Got him.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. That. Let me see. What else? Now I can. Okay. So I'd say I covered the three main issues with the Russian invasion. Um, and we talked about Clearview AI. So now what I can do is talk about more random things. Um, that I didn't really get to write notes on, and there's like a lot of other stuff.
Oh, there's one thing that I think is interesting that I
Yeah,
brought up in the
yeah. Oh,
comments
which by the
actually.
way, I'll clarify for those of you listening, you four. If any of you have anything you want to talk about, feel free at any time.
So the thing I would thought was interesting is what extent I brought this up earlier for like a moment. It's just like what extent uh like the propaganda, like, because obviously I know you said like a lot of the stuff that we see is like NATO stuff, but like let's say like Zelensky um had like a bunch of assassination attempts, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
I feel like it's like very plausible, but that didn't happen,
No, that
and
it.
it's basically
Yeah,
yeah, it just didn't happen, and it's basically just like a ploy to the Ukrainian people to just basically be like, guys, look, I'm staying here with you guys even if my life is in danger, etc. Right? And I do wonder. This is just kind of like a statement. I mean, it might spawn discussion. Who knows, really? But I just kind of wonder, what you guys think about like what could have been propaganda, what couldn't have been. Like obviously there's the ghost of Kiev, if you remember all that shenanigans from the start of the war. And like obviously I think it's pretty easy to say that the ghost of Kiev wasn't real. But again, it's like in the same way that the ghost of Kiev was like kind of like an icon for the people, larger than life. So is Zelensky now, and so him like basically having himself as, you know, I survived all these assassination attempts, all this stuff happened to me, and I'm still here, I'm still with you. That's also like a very I'm not sure if any of that's actually happening. And I do think it's interesting to try and discern propaganda from reality, especially within a situation where we have like social media and stuff, and it's not just in print because he's an actor, right? That's the point.
Right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say what you will about the assassination attempts. I think it would make sense that, like I spoke about very briefly earlier, they aired so Chechnya. I'm gonna do a little bit of history. Chechnya is this little area within Russia that is Muslim. Um, and so back in the late '90s, they like tried to become independent from Russia. But they are surrounded by Russia, like they are in it. So that didn't go very well. Um, but what happened is their cities got heavily bombed, and destroyed, and just like completely obliterated, until they were like essentially bent into submission. And then from there on, the people that grew up there are very tough, hardened people, and they become special forces, and they're known as Chechnyan special forces. And so they're very tough soldiers. And so what at the beginning of this invasion, to take an airstrip in Kiev, which, like I said, is further ahead than what the main force of the Russian military got to. They Russia airdropped in these Chechnyan special forces, so it makes sense to me that they would have also dropped in maybe a small number near where they thought Zelensky was to try and capture him. You know, kind of like a SEAL Team 6 type thing. And it makes sense that they got repelled since there was no backup and they were surrounded by Ukrainian soldiers. But anyway, say what you will about him supposedly surviving other assassination attempts. What's most important is that it was very predicted, even by U.S. Military, that Kiev would fall within like the first 48 hours of the invasion. So the main thing is that Zelensky chose to stay in Kiev. And so the whole point of this invasion from Russia was to gain control of Ukraine. And the way they would have done that is they were trying to take Kiev, and then they would have installed a government. And so they likely would have killed Zelensky. So by him choosing not to, what everyone thought, choosing not to leave Kiev, everyone thought he would be killed. And so I believe by not doing that, he's as brave as that. So I think the assassination attempts beyond that are mostly like irrelevant, because like they could be true, they could be false. I think that mostly doesn't matter. You get a good amount of Zelensky's character from that moment.
I'm not trying to discount like, oh, it's like he wasn't in any danger at all. No, I think that he is definitely like he's basically everything he sets himself up to be. But like I just think it's interesting that these things are definitely plausibly not real. It's like the cherry on top of this character. Like not only is he staying in Kiev with his people, he also has already lived through attempts. I just think it's kind of interesting to look at that.
Yeah,
there's not too much else in this. Yeah.
Okay. Now Jake can. Oh wait. Skylar, did you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I mean, I just I don't have any problem believing that the assassinations were genuine.
Yeah.
Because assassinations on presidents, even in America, isn't super uncommon. Like I think Trump had 4 attempts, Obama had 6. They're just generally not super publicized because they don't want to bring on copycats.
They also don't want to like, make it
thing.
seem like your president's weak. I mean, obviously, that makes sense.
Right, but in the case of the Ukraine, it makes sense to publicize assassination attempts. So I got no problem believing that that's real.
Yeah.
Hi, Jake.
Hello.
All right, Jake, do you want to give your opinion on the whole Clearview AI thing?
On the AI thing. I mean, I was kind of just like, I was, obviously listening the whole time, and I was just thinking, like, I sort of agree with everyone there because obviously it is a major like security issue, which I'm not cool with, not a big fan of stuff like that. But also I do see what you're talking about whenever you say like, whenever you're like, it kind of is almost moral to the fact to like give the parents closure and like let the parents know, but it could obviously also just be used in a very horrible way to the point where I don't think it's something that should be necessarily implemented.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. Anything else you want to say on
Uh,
anything?
on the note of like Derek talking about how it's like possible that Zelensky just kind of lied about his assassination attempts, I don't think it's necessarily like a bad thing. Kind of like, I mean, y'all are obviously
Yeah.
agreeing on that as well, but it's like it's not a bad thing just because in the whole time of war and like Ukraine and all the citizens are going through such awful times, like to have this like strong leader is kind of something that's good for the Ukrainian
Yeah,
citizens.
I liked Ghost of Kiev because I think it was like I think it was even at the time I think I didn't believe it was real, and I think that was most people probably didn't believe it was real, but the idea of the Russians having wide air superiority, but there's one Ukrainian pilot who's so good, and if you look up in the sky, it's kind of like seeing Superman. You see your hero who's still there to protect.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think it's just a good thing, like for people to believe in stuff like that.
yeah,
It's
and
just like
so
it's like the idea of faith,
right,
people
yeah,
kind of
I
just
think that's probably very
The
cool for the
comparison to
Ukrainian people.
Superman, I think, is very
Right, because it's
kind of
like
funny.
any plane in the sky, for any kid, that's the
it
Ghost of
could be
Kiev.
him.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
yeah,
And so I
yeah.
think, and it's probably no one, but the idea that it could be any of them, like Superman, I think is very
Is he
cool.
still kicking, by the way?
What?
The
Ghost of
Ghost
The
of
Ghost
Kiev?
of
Kiev.
Like I
Kiev?
said, I don't
Yeah,
think he's
I
real.
don't think he's real.
I don't think
Oh, you
he's
think he's
real.
real? Oh, okay. I don't know.
Keenan was
I
looking
thought
at the sky and seeing the planes, and he's like,
I don't know. I'm looking for him right now. I
Keenan
can't see him.
goes out of his house in
Keenan is
Texas
the
and
kid that
looks
you
up
were
in the sky. Yeah,
describing.
he looks up in the sky and sees like a
So
normal airline jet
I
and
think it
says,
was
"Oh,
just
that's
a
the Ghost of
series of
Kiev."
That's the
like
Ghost of Kiev.
I think
It
it was like
says
a
like
series of
American
fighter
Airlines.
jets, and then
Yeah,
they
he
just
looking up
like
at the sky, seeing that Airbus A380, being like, "Oh, it's the
Oh,
Ghost of
that's him.
Kiev."
That's him. He's going up in
I,
the
I
thing.
think I think it was a series of fighter jets and like a mix of propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I'm sure something similar happened because most things like they always stem from some form of truth. So I'm sure there was like a plane or multiple planes that like took down Russian forces, but it's like it wasn't this one insane like Luke Skywalker ass like pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Russia's shit also just crashes like 40% of the time, so I'm sure that helped.
I would be
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
terrified to be any part of the Russian military. Like just like your options are so bleak. You get into a vehicle.
I don't
Oh,
think you're
it
gonna
might
have to
just
worry about
yeah, it
that.
might just immediately crash or or run out of gas.
Also, I think the whole obviously this whole situation is very interesting just because it's like Russia's obviously Russia's known for their propaganda of their citizens and everything. But I think now this is like the first exposure that all the citizens and the soldiers get of like the fact that Russia is actually just lying about everything. And it's like the
Yeah.
first time that every citizen in Russia hears about it and they know about it. And so I think that's gonna
Yeah, because
lead to
previously they
some.
never really had like a real point of contest. Like there
Yeah,
was like
but now, like, yeah, Putin basically just kind of handed it to them. They were like, here, let's go invade Russia to get rid of or invade Ukraine to get rid of the Nazis. And then, as soon as they realized that there were no Nazis that they were fighting, they were kind of like, well, we have been lied to our whole
well,
lives.
it's also
Yeah.
like Russia the best in the world. Let's go invade Ukraine.
Yeah, it's similar to like the U.S. Vietnam War type thing, where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's like oh, let's go fight for freedom, and then it's like oh, well, that's not really what's happening. And then
And you
people
lose.
Yeah, and then people started wanting to not go into war. So people were, during the Vietnam time, people were lying and doing everything they possibly could to not get forced into going to war.
Which I have a more recent thing to say on this. So after the invasion happened for like a week or whatever, and public support for those who knew about it was not good in Russia. Putin announced that he would not be using any new conscripts for it, which was fine. And then but however, like a week ago or like more recent than that, it might have been the last few days. I'm not sure. He rescinded that, so he is once again going to call upon new conscripts now, to be a part of this force. Now, what happens with that is that these conscripts are Russian kids who are smart enough and have the ability to get past this Russian media. So if before they were simply ignoring this, because they've probably, I'm sure like all people under like 25 have probably heard about the truth in Russia, but a lot of them simply are choosing not to believe it, or to believe what the Russian government is saying. But
Yeah.
however, now with these with the essentially a new draft, their actual lives are in danger now, and so now it's harder to ignore.
Well, yeah.
It's harder to ignore what is being heard, and so there was a different company, not Clearview AI, that is doing that they keep track of the amount of like the opinions essentially through like Russian social media, like through a bunch of message boards and stuff, and they organize data on what the opinions and stuff are, and very recently it has grown substantially in discontentment with what's happening, and people have been talking about it more and stuff. So it seems like it is growing, the unhappiness for the situation.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's like, oh, the 25-year-old and younger, they like hear about it, but they're like, oh, that's fake. They kind of choose to ignore it.
Yeah.
But now with this whole Ukraine thing, it kind of real makes them realize that, oh, maybe it wasn't fake. And so I think Russia's probably just going to go through something similar that the US did like during the Vietnam era, where it's like now the younger generation of Russia is not very like they're not very patriotic towards their own country now, and they're kind of like critical of it.
Yep. Any other thoughts on this from you guys?
I hope Putin nukes Lubbock. Please kill me.
Oh my god.
Okay, child.
Please.
Jeez, it will not hit, dude. Their accuracy is so pathetic.
That's what
They
I
have
said.
planes.
Okay.
They have
Yeah.
planes going less than Mach 1. That have a 60% miss rate. That is pathetic.
Yeah.
America
Even
in the
though-
60s had planes going Mach 3 with an 85% hit rate.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
think we're
come
good. And
on.
also the US has like defense, so it's like I think we're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
their
so-
stealth operations suck ass. So
Yeah, actually, I'll talk about this a little bit. I'm gonna go into a more kind of different field on this conversation. At the very beginning of the war, when it seemed to me, as with everyone else, like in the first couple days, that Ukraine was just gonna fall to Russia, and that a lot
Yeah.
of innocents were gonna be killed. I had my opinion that which I still believe this for the most part. I mean, I'm happy the way it played out, but but basically, if it had been the kind of situation where Ukraine would have just lost if Russia wasn't incompetent and they had better technology, and forces were better mobilized and stuff, then I supported the idea that we and by we I guess I mean the U.S. and whoever wants to join us. I think I said NATO, but I don't specifically care if it's a NATO action or not. But I believe that we, as in the U.S. or whatever, should keep Russia within its borders unless it's more like I don't know, unless it's a smaller scale kind of thing. So like they did this in Belarus, kind of, and that
Belarus?
Belarus.
Did you just call it Bel R us?
The
Bells
Prince of
are us.
Belarus.
Okay.
The Fresh Prince of Belarus.
but anyway, in Belarus, they sent in like a small number of forces, and they took control of the government that way, and they installed a puppet government. But that didn't result in like widespread atrocities or anything. Which okay, to be fair, if Russia had invaded very successfully into Ukraine, there probably would have been significantly less civilian casualties. But anyway, the idea that if Russia was to invade Ukraine effectively, and they would have still killed a lot of civilians and made the country not independent, I believe that the U.S. in that kind of situation should stop um, Russia essentially from doing that. Now, the reason we didn't do that, and obviously in real life, is because of the threat of escalation, of
In real
U.S.
life.
Yeah, U.S. troops fighting Russian troops, and the escalation of that to global nuclear war. But what I believed at the time was that it was immoral to let the populace of Ukraine simply be succumbed to a bully, and I thought that was unfair.
No
And
by
so
ending.
my opinion was if it was something where a lot of civilian casualties were going to occur, unlike what happened in Belarus, I thought that the
Stop.
U.S. should. I said Belarus. Oh, it's
It's
Belarus.
Belarus.
Balls. I said that the U.S. should essentially intervene and threaten a direct assault and engagement,
So
and even with the threat of escalation. So I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions on if that had been the case, which luckily it wasn't, obviously.
So I have a little bit of so what's the difference between Ukraine being under the thumb of Putin and Russians being under the thumb of Putin?
In the long run, not much.
So why is it moral for us to rescue Ukraine, but amoral for us to invade Russia?
Um, because Ukrainians were already free. So obviously, it's probably moral. I think to overthrow Putin. Um, but it's unrealistic. However, for Ukraine, I think it could
Also,
have been done
And the risk.
realistically. Yeah,
I mean,
so that's my opinion. Is that they would be Ukrainians would be losing freedom. The Russians didn't have a lot of it in the first place. Um, and like
that
I
doesn't
said,
make them less entitled to it, though.
no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's less. I'm not saying this is completely a
That's real.
moral argument. I'm just saying, in terms of our capability, I think it was we're fairly capable of being able to stop Russia from doing these kinds of things. Obviously, there's risk of escalation. That's very real. But I think that realistically, we could do it without it escalating to nuclear war, and I think we have a moral obligation to do so.
I
As
think
compared to Russia, where we couldn't invade Russia, or they would probably use nuclear weapons. So
I mean, the thing about Russia though is it's a good old fashioned 20th century cult of personality government, right? Like
right,
like Stalin and like Hitler.
yeah.
So you take out the guy,
Russian
that
strongman.
resolves most of your issues,
Exactly, but
at
it's
least in
very
the short
hard to
run.
kill
So
just Putin without him.
I don't know. With our intelligence, I think the main reason why we haven't is because we're scared of China, which is fair. But I think it's kind of immoral. I mean, I don't think government should exist, but if it does exist, like, come on.
I think Jazz is kind of describing like just the US's mentality as a whole throughout history because they're like we see a bad guy that's preventing someone from being free. Like we're
Yeah,
the good guys who are free. We need to protect the
We're
other good
always the
guys
good
who want to
guys.
be free.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just
yeah. I'm very interesting because a lot of leftists, I think, believe in a lot
I'm
more
very
of stick to
interested.
your own
Liberal.
business.
I'm cool and corking, not like
Yeah,
other
I'm
Jazz goes,
leftists.
real.
I'm very
I'm a
interesting.
real imperialist.
I
But no,
thought
yeah, I believe in global interference depending on the situation, which is not like I don't think widely believed by people as far left as I am. So
so. So I think the second greatest evil that you can do is war, but the first is authoritarianism. So like I don't know. I think the fact that America hasn't done anything about even North Korea is pretty pathetic in my mind, and kind of disgusting as well. So
okay. But anyway, yeah, that's fair. But I'm gonna make Jake and Derek and Keenan now give their opinions on specifically if the Ukrainian situation had been that Russia was a very effective military force. Do you think we should have threatened to intervene, and then if they had simply called our bluff and invaded, do you think we should have, actually intervened with
So
troops?
militarily wise, I don't know too much about the global like the global plane. I don't know that much about like the military situation comparing the three. Obviously, you know that there's like the supposed three powers, which is China, Russia, and the U.S. But
Uh, uh,
in that situation, if they were like a fully fledged like like a U.S. strength military and they chose to invade Ukraine, then I would say that the U.S. would have to mobilize, but not to defend Ukraine.
What do you mean mobilize?
Like I think this would be like a situation in which we start sending troops into Europe without like going into Ukraine. Does
We
that
already
make
have
sense?
troops in Europe.
Yeah, but like more. Like
Oh,
mobilize
just
more is
more,
what I
yeah.
mean. Yeah, just like
Like as if we're
like
going to, but why? Just to scare Russia? Put them on edge?
essentially if I'm like again thinking from the perspective back then, it's like at this point um it's sort of, while we know what Russia says they're going for, it's still sort of an unknown threat of what's the end goal is going to be. So we have to be
Right.
wary.
Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah,
fair opinion that if this had gone really well for Russia, they might have at some point tried it for the Baltics, which are
yeah,
NATO, which would be a
yeah,
whole nother can of worms for them because Baltic countries are mostly in NATO. And, attacking one NATO country activates Article 5, which means all NATO countries have to fight against the attacker, which,
yeah.
obviously.
Well, that's kind of like what the general consensus of what was like the main, because like what you said, whenever like the first 2 days or whatever of the invasion, everyone was like, oh, Ukraine's gonna fall, like they're gonna get to Kiev in 48 hours, like stuff like that. And so whenever that was the main idea, everyone like I feel like the general consensus was kind of like, oops, sorry, was kind of like what's it called? U.S. will like involve if Putin decides to overstep his bounds and like touch foot on a NATO territory. But I feel like other than that, like if he never stepped foot on NATO territory, I don't think the U.S. would have ever intervened. Like they might have like made threats or whatever. But I mean, I don't necessarily know about. I don't really have an opinion of it whether it's like their obligation or not to intervene, just because like that's not necessarily something that goes on in my mind most of the time.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
fine.
feel like generally, they would have and probably should have just kind of stayed neutral, or not neutral, but like stayed aside. And then as soon as if he ever touched foot on NATO territory, that's when the U.S. would get involved mainly.
that's pretty much
So,
what I meant.
but why do NATO countries get like extra protection? Like I don't
Because
get
Well,
they're
that.
that's
part of
just how the
NATO.
organization
That's
is.
how
I
it
mean, it's
works.
not like
Unfortunately.
Because NATO gang.
But we got to think.
Do you mean
You got to
morally?
think morally. Yeah, morally about these things.
I'm
Like,
saying the U.S. is ever or will be moral. I
yeah.
just
I
think
mean,
that's
this
how
is
NATO
kind of
works.
like
but you're encouraging an amoral thing.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like the difference between like the duality of whether this is a moral issue or if it's a legal issue, and obviously it's both. And so, like right now, we're kind of talking about the legal side, and you're talking about the moral side,
I
because
mean, I
it's
don't
like
think anyone's gonna have a legal problem with America defending Ukraine from Russia,
well,
except
yeah,
for
but
like
like
China, of course. But
well, yeah, but
going
it's like the U.S. is just like, oh,
I
we're
think
not
he
going to get
means like
involved.
politically, like
Yeah,
the
I didn't really mean to
tension,
say
the tension
legal,
and
but
relationship between like the U.S. and Russia and the world in general.
yeah, I
Um,
didn't really mean to say legal. That was just the first word that came to mind. But
yeah,
Because if the U.S. suddenly was up at arms, as soon as Ukraine like was under threat, it would basically be like some other countries. If something happened there, they'd be like, "Hey, we were relying on you for support as well. Why
yeah, and
didn't
it's like if the
you?"
U.S. gets involved with Ukraine in this situation, it's like why wouldn't the U.S. get involved in every other country that's going through like some kind of conflict like this? And then that kind of goes back to like the whole U.S. needs to say like we're the good guys, we're saving everyone. And so like what you mentioned of how like they haven't gotten involved in North Korea at all, and so it's like if they got involved in Ukraine, then that begs the question, why don't they get involved anywhere else?
yeah, and also it like proves a lot of people that don't like interventionism in general. Correct,
they
like
don't like what?
interventionism.
Oh,
So like yeah, intervening. So like people like Hasanabi and stuff who like originally thought this was sort of
Hassan's takes are
propaganda.
terminal, dude.
I
Jesus
like
Christ.
some of Hassan's takes, but some of them
He's
some of them like this were just not. They were because like even I don't know. I won't get onto a tangent about
This was a
talking about
Hasanabi.
Hassan,
This
but
was not a
yeah,
Hasanabi moment.
he really says some things that I think are like very identical to what I would say, and then he says some things that I do not understand at all, and then he sticks by them. But it's whatever.
I don't. Uh,
Um,
but
Yeah.
I don't know. And the one of the, how do I phrase this? One of the cooler things, cooler things about the American military versus most other militaries of its size in the world is the American military is purely volunteer, right? There's no
Yeah.
drafting involved, which makes, so like with Russia, I would say it would be immoral for the Russian government to use their military for anything other than the defense of their own nation, just
Yeah.
because they rely on conscription. But because America is purely volunteer based, these people know,
It's more
they know
fair,
what they're
yeah,
signing up
yeah,
for.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying just do the USSR thing and throw them at a wall, but
I agree
it
with what
is
you're
more
saying
than
here,
moral
yeah.
to go into Ukraine
Now,
and any other
Yeah, well,
authoritarian
those
to be
country.
fair, it's not
it's
as
like
simple
historic
as that
reasons.
because there's a lot of propaganda towards like a lot of the soldiers don't know what they're signing up for, or they're like in their civilian lives they had a
They're
very
just there for free
jaded
college.
understanding of the like wars that are going on or what they would be going to fight for. But yeah, in general, I agree with the idea that a voluntary military has is should be allowed to be more or it makes sense anyway that they're more interventionist than one
Yeah.
that requires conscription.
If we knew Russia was going to invade a month before they did, like how much other intelligence do you think we have? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
like that's fucking crazy that we knew that. So yeah, but
Yeah, and
I
also
digress.
like I'm sure, like Jazz said, the propaganda thing. I'm sure the Russian soldiers believed it was for defense. They're like, oh, we're gonna go defend the
Yeah.
homeland from the Ukrainian Nazis, and they believed that like it was for defense, that it was for the better,
Yeah, a lot of
which
the
obviously
Russian
was kind of the whole
soldiers,
thing.
because not including the ones that were told it was exercises, but the the ones that were told that they were going to denazify Ukraine, I think they were not unhappy by being deployed for that. They seemed fairly content to do that mission. Um,
Well, yeah,
because they, yeah, because they
Russia's
believed it was a good thing. So
yeah, because like Russia's kind of built off like the whole oh, we're Russia, we're very strong. Like it's the same thing as like the U.S., like very patriotic. But then as soon as they got into Ukraine and realized what they were doing was not what they were told, then that kind of broke the whole
yeah,
patriotism within the military and within the general public of Russia.
Well, then I would argue that that is the United States allowing an authoritarian power to exist for too long. Right? The
Yeah,
fact that
I
they were able to
mean,
muster up the strength to do that is pretty terrible, especially because, like, the American government has known that the Russian military is terrible for a really long time now. So I'm not.
yeah, well, I mean, I think that just kind of boils down to like the leader at the time. Obviously, I don't know like that much about the U.S.
yeah,
government, but it's kind of like there's not like a law in the Constitution that's like you have to get rid of authoritarian governments, obviously. So it's like it's kind of just up to debate every day, and I'm sure it gets debated all the time. But it's not necessarily the U.S.'s obligation to go after authoritarian governments, but I understand why you say it like should be or why you think it's a good thing.
right. Oh yeah. By the way, just a fun little fact. If Trump had
Fun
gotten
fact.
if Trump had gotten a second term, one of the things he wanted to do was dissolve NATO. So if Trump had won in 2020, it's very likely there would have been little to no response to this whatsoever. Um, so,
Is there a
yay
response?
Biden. Oh yeah,
I
you
mean,
mean
Sort of
the
a
no, I
response.
mean,
I mean,
Not a
the
direct response, but a
not direct
very
response.
I would
We sent
call
a lot
I would
of
call
a
it
lot of
I,
very
weapons,
direct. This
a
is
lot
the
of
most you
supplies.
can direct without like having combat essentially.
I
Yeah,
don't
I would.
know. I don't
Yeah,
know how much NATO had to do that. I have a pretty. I fucking hate international cooperations and shit like UN, NATO. I dislike all those things. I think they're pretty uh, fucking worthless. I think the response would have been the same without NATO, honestly. Uh, but
I think it
I
would have
don't.
been to
What
I
the
don't
I
think it.
extent. I feel like obviously I don't know, and obviously none of us know, but I feel like Trump probably wouldn't have gone to the extent that Biden did to go and assist Ukraine
yeah
as much as possible without sending like direct
Okay, well,
force.
let's if even if we put in a situation with Biden minus NATO, it's like I feel like a lot of the people involved in the war right now who are like doing something. A lot of the countries, sorry, wouldn't be able to have this kind of political freedom, because like they can, a lot of countries can basically, they can like take actions, basically just say like, hey, we're working like under NATO, because like we're moving just in case they Russia steps foot on NATO soil, and then it's basically like it's effectively an excuse to mobilize forces.
Yeah, see, and
Uh,
that's why I don't like NATO. Like, just
yeah, but
fucking
like
own
without it, then it's, yeah, I would like for countries to just own it, but you know,
I mean,
then
yeah.
yeah.
Yo,
I mean, a lot of things are
I
just
am
like,
curious to see how Trump would have handled, because I would imagine the president probably has to directly approve the releasement of classified information. So I am curious as to how he would have approached that.
yeah. So yeah, what
That's
I
super
was getting
interesting.
at with the dissolution of NATO was less of the no NATO in the situation and more of what having Trump and his people in power would have done. Which okay, it's very obvious the incompetence that existed within the Trump administration. I don't think saying this is like, I mean, sure, you can call me biased, but I think it's like fairly like objective,
damn
the
liberal.
incompetence that existed within the board members of like his cabinet. So it's like it's pretty obvious. I don't think that he would have, even if you aren't including like Trump's personal decisions, like what he would have chosen to do based on his beliefs. Even if you don't include that, I don't think the response would have been as effective by his cabinet members towards like this strategy of releasing the information and getting the aid and then unifying, rallying the world around Ukraine. But more importantly than that is that the at the beginning of this, Trump called this invasion by Russia a very smart move right before it happened. He repeatedly called it. He was like, "Wow, this is very smart by Russia. This is," and he like I can pull up the full statement. I could link it in the description if someone wanted me to, of him like the exact thing he said. But he talked about how he was like, "Oh, the idea of saying that Ukraine needs this was very smart." And then that was like a couple days before Russia began failing, so hugely, and so it was very funny. But in general, Trump looks up, I think, very highly to the authoritative position that Putin holds. So I don't think, based on his like personal beliefs, he would have done anything. He probably would have. He probably would have done the opposite. Like I said, I think he would probably have called it smart, like he did in real life. And he probably would have
Well,
Are we
cheerleaded
talking
it.
about if Trump was president?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean, like didn't Donald Trump like he was told, he was informed that Vladimir Putin was hiring assassins to kill American soldiers, and he didn't give a fuck. Donald Trump did not give a fuck. He didn't even mention it.
yeah,
Of
because
course, Donald Trump he wouldn't have done shit about Putin. He
he
wouldn't
looks
have
up
done
to
Yeah,
shit.
the he
and
looks up
And
to what
also,
kind
also,
of man Putin is.
the first time he got impeached wasn't didn't have something to do with President Zelensky.
Yeah. I can
Yeah,
very quickly explain that
yeah, well,
the U.S. was
he didn't done
providing
shit.
the U.S. provides aid every year to Ukraine, in terms of funding. Which, okay, to be fair, Ukraine's government has a decent amount of corruption in it. Uh,
every
but
government does.
yeah,
yeah, I was
exactly.
about to say.
But
So
but the U.S.
kind
provides
of
the
the
money every
bylaws.
year, that they are to spend on defense and stuff for the purpose of this very situation which has occurred. Um,
Yeah, and I
but
think
anyway,
like,
in 2019, I think it was 2019. I'm like 90% sure it's 2019. It might have been 2018. No, actually, I think it was 2018. In 2018, Trump was trying to get, no, it would have been 2019. Yeah, because before the elections.
oh my
It was
god.
it was during COVID.
Yeah, yeah. In 2019, Trump was on call with Zelensky, and he wanted. I'm not going to go into the details on this, but essentially, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, worked with. I think I want to say Ukrainian company, like a large Ukrainian company, and not the government, but it might have been the government. But anyway, he worked with an important part of Ukraine, and so Donald Trump called Zelensky and asked him to find dirt on Hunter Biden, for the purpose of Trump being able to use it against Joe Biden, in the coming election. And so, but during the call, he threatened to withhold the aid that the U.S. gives Russia or not Russia, gives Ukraine every year. And so that was the whole impeachment thing. for context.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Ukraine's not a great country, but Jesus fucking Christ.
But,
Yeah, and I think like also like what you said, where Trump was like, if I get reelected, I'm gonna try to dissolve NATO. Obviously, he didn't. He kind of shares like the opinion or the idea that like that national institutions like that aren't the best. And so I feel like if this was something that happened during his presidency, he probably would have neglected aid, or like y'all said, I don't really think he would have helped Russia, but I don't think he would have. I think he would have definitely neglected.
I
Can
don't
you-
think it wouldn't have helped.
Can you send me that article, by the way, Jazz? Because my understanding was he called Putin smart. He didn't call the invasion smart. Stop making me look like I like Trump. However,
no, I have to
call.
No, what I have to do is call you out because I know you don't like Trump, but you can have your political beliefs and also understand like grave issues with him. And so I have to like make sure you understand that because I
Well,
believe
that's
important
just
to a lot
something
of
that
people.
doesn't.
But I'm pretty. The only thing I don't fucking know. It's so difficult to track what people in government even fucking do.
Oh, but I see. Okay, for the point of this podcast, I'm not gonna get into my personal like opinions and information on like.
Isn't that the whole point of a podcast?
Well, I will at some point if I like researched it more and I wanted to talk about it thoroughly. But because I don't have like all the citations on hand, I would feel a little bit rude. Not rude. I can't think of the word. It would feel I don't know, bad. I guess.
Premature?
Like, no, I can't think of the word. It's like whatever. I'll give up on the word I'm trying to find. But anyway.
Oh, here I
I
found an NPR article about the Trump thing.
Yeah, I think it would
Okay,
be
so
bad for me.
yeah, I haven't been keeping up with the shit.
Yeah, I think it'd be bad for me to talk about all the collusion with Russia,
Where are
all
you
the
at?
like Trump loving, all the like extent of Trump loving authoritarianism and specifically Vladimir Putin in general. So I won't get into that, but yeah, for the purpose of him, just simply saying that he would enjoy, or that he thought the invasion was smart, and that he wanted to dissolve NATO. I think it was quite telling of at least you can point out at least one very like important effect of the 2020 election.
Yeah, in this,
because see what you're talking about, Skylar, is that you agree with me on the interventionism, at least to an extent. I mean, you believe there should be more interventionism, but you agree that there should have been the interventionism that existed right now. But with Trump, none of that would have happened. So that is one thing to consider that I hope other people listening to this podcast consider. If you're a Trump supporter or if you didn't vote for Joe Biden, the outcome that this event would have had with him in power.
Yeah, well, also, so here, I'll read a little bit of this article for you. So this NPR article, what I sent Skylar, says Trump has shifted positions on the war in Ukraine shortly before President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion. Trump called Putin smart and savvy because Putin had declared portions of Ukraine independent, something Putin had no right to do. And then it says, after the invasion began, Trump defended saying that Putin was smart and called President Biden weak and described NATO countries as not so smart. And then it says, quote, the problem is not that Putin is smart, which of course he is smart, Trump told a crowd of conservative political action conference. He said, but the real problem is that our leaders are dumb, so dumb. So this kind of just shows how Trump was obviously very critical of Biden's approach to this. And so I think, going back to the idea like, oh, if Trump was president, I don't think he would have had a similar response at all, let alone he would have lended any form of aid.
Right. And it's like, and it's
here, I'll send this to you, Jazz, as well, so you
I
can
didn't
link
cover
it.
my bullet points that I also
Kian,
wrote
what the
outside
fuck?
of the that. But this U.S. response was incredibly effective. I think it was very smart for them to publicize all this information.
Oh yeah, that was dope as fuck.
And yeah,
honestly,
and
What was?
them publishing their intelligence about Russia setting up to invade Ukraine.
And then,
Yeah.
and Biden did a really good job of unifying NATO and Europe and a lot of the world against Russia. And so, yeah, I don't know. I very much appreciate how this was covered. This was
Yeah, I think the
very
U.S.'s
good Biden
response.
moment. Outstanding Biden and cabinet.
Certified Brandon moment.
So
Oh, no.
What did you just say, Kenan?
Certified Brandon moment.
I said that ironically. Don't hurt me.
What is?
So I think
What is
I
that?
think
Let's
like
go, Brand. I'm not gonna explain. Let's go. Brand.
What is
I'm not
that?
wait, you don't know what Let's Go
Please.
Brandon is?
Host.
Bro, I don't have social
Okay, here.
media.
Okay, well, we don't have to talk about this now. It's fine. I'll fill you in later.
I'm gonna hate this, aren't I?
You will.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but I think that was great because that's what I want from the American military. So I'm an anarchist, right? But however, I am preaching war a little bit here, which is kind of funny, a little quirky though. But I think if the American intelligence should do more of that. They should be like completely open about the information they have, as long as it doesn't risk the life of any American military members. So yeah, I think that's dope as fuck, and I think there needs to be more of that.
And I think what's it called? So wasn't it? I don't remember exactly because I didn't pay attention in the history class. But there was a point in time when the U.S. kind of made it a plan to attempt to stay neutral throughout global conflicts. Wasn't it right before World War I or something? I don't know.
Before World War One, there was a lot of opposition to the war with Truman. I think, I'm pretty sure
Said that a lot of times.
Yeah, but the U.S. It's always kind of been an idea that the U.S. always wanted to stay generally neutral throughout global conflicts unless it directly affected them.
Right.
And so this was kind of the best middle ground that Biden and like the U.S. government could have done, where they don't directly, or they do directly, but they don't like send troops there, but they do help out in the best way that they can without getting directly involved.
Exactly. Superior technology, superior intelligence,
Yeah,
and you just win without doing anything.
It was overall a very good idea.
Fantastic.
So +1 on the Joe Biden scale, I guess. I don't know.
+1 Joe Biden scale.
No more Brandon. -1 Brandon.
Dude.
I
Okay,
sent it to you. I sent it to you.
Yeah, there's a house on my parents' street that has a "Let's Go Brandon" thing, like with Christmas lights around it.
Yeah.
And this makes sense now.
They
This
sell
makes sense now.
They sell the Let's Go Brandon hoodies at the mall.
There's a group of kids in my in one of my MCOM classes that on Wednesday, every fucking Wednesday, like it's some religious thing, they all wear Let's Go.
That's ROTC Day.
There's 3 kids that wear Let's Go.
That's ROTC Day.
The hats,
That's
the
ROTC
fucking
Day.
jackets. I want to punch them.
All right.
That's
funny.
It's
It's
kinda
more
more
Brandon.
topic now.
We can talk about Brandon
This
later.
is the topic.
I'm talking about Brandon.
I'm gonna conclude this soon because it's nearing 2 hours, and that is I wanted it
is
to only
good.
be about an hour and a half. So this was a fairly long.
Hey, you should get this on Spotify, man,
I'll
so I
put
can
this
listen
on
to the other
Spotify.
ones.
Anyway, so let me cover some other random things that I can think
Talk
of.
with Bo Jogan.
So yeah, I talked about So in we're gonna talk about some atrocities now. So I talked about how probably horrible it is for a lot of the Russians, the Russian soldiers, especially the conscripts. The actual Russian soldiers, like the people who wanted to be in the military and choose to stay there, probably aren't as upset about the situation. But for the conscripts, being in enemy territory for a month, with all the logistics issues I described, and the high tensions between them and the Ukrainians would suck as it is. And as you described, or as someone described, I think Keenan, them only having like
Aye.
2 mags of ammo, and stuff would be very, very scary. But also, like I said briefly, the Ukrainians have been very resourceful during this conflict, and how they use technology and their soldiers and stuff to fight against the Russians. And so with they've used drones for all kinds of things and stuff. But like I briefly mentioned earlier, one of the things that the Ukrainians do is they communicate Russian positions and stuff. And so I think to an extent that would be very scary to be a Russian soldier. Now, with that being said, I'm now going to talk about the atrocities that are war
Superior
crimes
comms.
that the
Shut up, Jake.
Russians have committed.
I'm probably gonna head out.
All right, goodbye, Jake.
Goodbye.
So in like I said, in Bucha, which is a suburb of Kiev, they would round up the men and execute them. And then there was lots of reports of rape, and then the like other things they would do is I think just general like executions. Like they would just shoot random people on the streets for no particular reason.
They
Uh,
also bombed hospitals.
yeah, they will. Yeah, I'm getting to that. Okay. But
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, you're good. In Bucha, they would just like shoot people, that were like on, like one guy was on a bicycle and they just shot him, uh, and then people walking and stuff, and then they would just leave their bodies in the streets. Now this is confirmed because when the Russians left, Bucha, the bodies were still there, but also there was satellite imagery from weeks earlier of the bodies being in the exact same positions on the streets and stuff. So they just kind of leave them. But there were also lots of mass graves dug and filled with bodies of just random civilians and non soldiers, non combatants. And then in Mariupol, where I talked about the Russians are besieging the city because they have completely surrounded it and have surrounded it for like over a month. There were originally 400,000 people in Mariupol, so bigger than Lubbock. Um, I don't know how many evacuated, but I heard this is probably not correct. I heard the number of 100,000 people remaining. Um, I think it's probably more than that, but but I'm just gonna say 100,000. No, it had to be. It would have had to be more than that. But anyway, in this fairly large city, they have cut off all supplies. The Russians have cut off all supplies. So all humanitarian aid has been completely ceased and has been for a month. And so the people in that city have received no food or water. Now, like I talked about earlier, there is the battalion, the Azov battalion, that has some Nazis in it. And they are still fighting in the city. Now, within the last week, most of the city's been lost to Russia. But before that, the Russians couldn't really invade the city because they kept getting repelled. But they also didn't allow any people to leave the city, or well, they did, but like very few. Like it was very small numbers. I think like a few hundred got out. There was probably more at the earlier part, but like recently, it's been only like a few hundred a day. But they've allowed very few people to leave, and they have completely cut off all Red Cross aid and other humanitarian aid from getting in. And what they also eventually started setting up are these things known as filtration camps. Now, these filtration camps let the people leave the city, but they have to go into Russia. So that's a very fun little Nazi esque moment of these people being forced to essentially exit into a hostile country where they're going to go to these camps and they're not sure what's going to happen, but they have to, because otherwise they'll starve to death or they'll run out of water. Um, and so I think, and then also, the buildings have been a lot of the buildings have been very badly destroyed, and a lot of people hide in the basements of these buildings during the bombings and airstrikes. And then when the buildings crumble on top of them, they can't get out. Now, in the areas that in the parts of the city that became Russian controlled, um, the civilians that tried to help clear the buildings for the people to get out of the basements were shot. So essentially, more large group executions because the people are literally trapped in basements and no one's allowed to help them, or they will also die. Um, so there was a significant amount of that happening, and just general starvation. I think the death toll in the city is up to like 21,000 civilians. So a pretty large, substantial number. And that's the and it's like I said, within the last few days, where I haven't been able to do as much research on current stuff as I have in the past on the last few days. But what I do know is in the last few days, a lot of the city has been taken because the Russians are pushing specifically the eastern front of Ukraine again more heavily now. And so they're actually beginning to take most of the city. And I think right now, as I'm saying this, they've taken like the majority of the city, and it'll probably fall in the next few days. Um, there will be a lot of if we're able to get Ukrainian soldiers to Mariupol within the next few weeks or month, we might be able to uncover the how truly grand the killings are there. But what is unfortunate is that if they take it soon and then this war drags out, the Russians brought mobile crematoriums with them to destroy the bodies of those killed. So it is likely that if this drags out, a lot of the atrocities committed in Mariupol will be toned down from what they really were, and they won't be as clear as to how large the war crimes really were. Um, Now, we were able to see what happened in Bucha and the other surrounding Kiev suburbs because the Russians left very quickly, which I wanted to cover early in my podcast, but I forgot to. But the Russians are essentially reorganizing their focus out of essentially the north in Kiev and towards the west, and they have moved all those soldiers back around to the east, and they are just going to try and take the Donbass region. Um, but they had to leave fairly quickly, which is why those bodies weren't destroyed or all buried. But in places like Mariupol and other places in the east of Ukraine, these atrocities might well be covered up by the Russians. So that's something to consider in the next few months. Um, Also, let me think about what I wanted to talk about. That might be it for the atrocities. Like Keenan said, they bomb civilian buildings all the time. That's pretty heavily covered in the news. Is they airstrike with cruise missiles, just random civilian cities in Kiev and like Lviv, which is on the west side of the country, and just other cities because the Russians were unable, for the most part, to take any cities, like at all in the country. So what they have been doing is trying to bombard them. Um, the way they did in Chechnya in the late 90s with complete annihilation of the civilian populace and infrastructure of the places because they're unable to actually secure them themselves. Now, it's not as bad as in Chechnya where the cities were completely obliterated, essentially, but it is still a lot of buildings, of civilian buildings and hospitals and stuff are being destroyed, and train stations with civilians escaping are being destroyed. Um, and lots of civilian deaths in general. Um, I think that might be all I want to say for atrocities, unless there's anything Keenan has info on.
There
he wants
have
to
been
say.
cases of Russian soldiers wearing Ukrainian soldier equipment, and
Yeah, that was something. But that's not really atrocity. That's just a war
I
crime.
didn't even hear about
yeah,
War
that.
I mean, he
crimes.
said wartime earlier, but
You don't know.
so
Wait, you
I,
didn't hear about this?
No.
A bunch of Russian soldiers were caught wearing Ukrainian uniforms.
Yeah, this is
that's
pretty
a
early on.
that's a
This is
death
this was
penalty.
this was very early. This was like right at the
Death
start of the
Maybe I
war.
heard about this and forgot about it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
bro.
And real quick, the filtration camps. The U.S. intelligence is suggesting that the purpose is to swipe biometric data and download data off people's phones, which is
Yeah,
kind
that
of
makes
interesting.
sense.
My Snapchat password.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a lot of civilian deaths because the civilian populace is in part working against the Russian military, uh, with some of them calling in locations and stuff. And so it's like real morality moment of if you're a Russian soldier and you're in this awful situation and the civilians are like if you knew the civilians were giving away your location,
Yeah.
then what do you do? I mean, I think there are easier ways to solve that than to kill them. But for a lot of Russians, that's what they've done. So, just awful situation caused by one man, essentially. So,
Vlad.
Donald Trump.
Yeah,
oh,
real.
Oh god.
Of course, Joe Biden did this.
Go Jaden.
On the bright
I'd ever deem
side,
myself.
this was covered like last week. Um, the Russian flagship out of their entire naval fleet, which when I was talking about the Ukrainian versus the Russian military early on in the podcast, I mentioned the Navy being one of the things where the Russians vastly overwhelmed in numbers the Ukrainians. But I think it is their largest disparity is with the Russians having significantly more ships and people in the Navy. Well, the main Russian flagship, their most important flagship, called the Moscow, last week got hit by two Neptune 2 anti-ship missiles, and it has been completely destroyed. So yay Ukrainians. The Russian media originally tried to say, oh, there was a fire that caught on board the ship, and then they tried to tow it away, and a storm that doesn't exist came in, and they lost the ship. But like a couple days ago, they have now began admitting on Russian television that the Ukrainians destroyed the ship. And I watched a segment right before this podcast, a segment on Russian television, showing this guy talking about it. And because in Russia they don't talk about this like a war. He was calling for a war. He was like, "Oh, this is a terrible act of aggression by the Ukrainians to destroy our flagship, the Moscow. That we need a full-out war now." And so I think that's very funny to see the state of the Russian television and propaganda.
Yeah,
But
Putin
anyway,
was fucking molding.
but anyway, yeah. They after that ship got completely destroyed in the last couple days. They did more airstrikes on Kiev, and Lviv specifically, I suppose, in retaliation. Which Lviv is a city on the western side of the country, and so it's pretty safe. They've had MSNBC correspondent who I watched a bunch stayed in that city during like it, and he would like be live during air raid sirens. It wasn't very dangerous because it's on the western side of the country, but they airstriked it because of the destruction of that ship.
The
But
airstriked or airstruck?
they I don't know, they airstruck. I guess airstriked. I think it's airstriked. Yeah, you say airstrike. They airstriked Lviv because I think airstruck isn't correct. But oh, also the Ukrainians. I'm gonna do a second part of this podcast in a few weeks, I think, because there's more I want to say. But the Ukrainians attacked a Russian oil depot like a few weeks ago, like 3 or 4 or something, which was on Russian soil, which was pretty cool. The Ukrainians just flew a bunch of helicopters into Russia, and then they just destroyed a Russian oil depot, and that was it. And then they went back, and I thought that was kind of funny. So yay Ukrainians.
Pretty baller.
Yeah, those are the two good things that I remember mentioning. I think that's about it. Do you guys
Doesn't
have
the
anything else
entire
to
like
say?
wealthy class of Russia hate Putin now? Because Sweden actually took a side and shut down all the bank accounts.
Because they're no longer
I
wealthy.
mean, yeah, oligarchs a
Yeah.
while ago came out against it, but a lot of them have to suck up to Putin because they were oligarchs that were created as oligarchs by Putin in the first place. So a lot of them have a lot of loyalty to him. But the ones that aren't as loyal that existed before Putin, probably are pretty unhappy. And I think a few of them have agreed and spoken out against it. I think that happened a while ago. I haven't heard about more of them speaking out against it recently, but yeah, I'll do a second one on the effects, a second episode of this podcast on more of the effects of how the U.S. and the world has retaliated against Russia, what that'll mean for Russia, and then what we think will happen going forward. And also, I'll cover obviously what has happened since this podcast episode to then, which will probably be in like, depending on when events happen, but like maybe 3 weeks. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do it on Maybe I'll do it after May.
I'm gonna do this more frequently.
Disclaimer: I don't run this
Ooh.
podcast. I am
Oh,
simply the co-host.
This won't be no the next episode of the podcast won't be this. I'm just saying we'll come back to Ukraine in the future.
Oh, okay, I see.
For the
What's
next
next
episode,
episode?
can we do a little book club? little book club?
I'm not
actually,
reading
my
a
dad wants
book.
me to do that.
He's
so-
gonna make
so
me
we'll
read
do that.
Henry Hazlitt.
You know,
Uh,
you know what book we should read?
Oh, jeez.
Oh wait, hang on. Let me
Hungry,
mention-
hungry
I will
caterpillar.
probably do the next episode of this after May 9th because on May 9th, that's Victory in Europe Day. Or it's like, it might not be Victory in Europe Day, but it's at least victory from World War II and Russia Day. So when they beat, I think it is Victory in Europe Day. So it's when, the Russians beat Nazi Germany. And so they really like that holiday and it means a lot to them. And I spoke about, the importance of World War II to the Russian populace. So I think significant stuff will have happened by then. So I'll probably cover it on like May 10th or 12th or something around there is when the second episode will be. Okay, what were you guys saying about book club?
Skylar.
The Fountainhead.
Ah,
I'm not
yeah,
reading that.
yeah.
It's like 700 pages.
Yeah.
I
Is it?
couldn't read it in any reasonable amount of time anyway.
Jazz
because
takes
I've been
20
trying-
minutes to read one page.
To be fair, it is not. Ayn Rand is not a great writer,
Appreciate
so
the
you
art.
can read it super easily.
That makes
It
sense.
reads like porn, dude.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not
I
the best
read my
writing.
porn.
You guys should all read All Quiet on the Western Front because it's only 130 pages.
I've already
read that
shit.
like
Okay, cool.
forever ago.
That's
Yeah,
like a
right.
that's like a
Well, yeah,
thing in
I know. I
school.
also read it in like 6th grade, but we should all read it again so we can vaguely talk about it on the next podcast.
Discuss.
Coming up, I think Mike will be coming up soon. Let's go, Mike. That'll be an economics.
Let's go, Mike.
Michael?
Let's go, Mike.
Economics centered
What?
podcast with maybe AOT discussion, depending on how far I got in the show.
Wait, who's Michael?
Mike?
No, Mike.
Mike, the guy that
Who's-
we talked to at Tech, the professor.
Oh shit, the homie.
I don't. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say on the next podcast. I don't know.
Oh, can I get a quick out of 10? How was the second half of AOT season 4? I haven't watched it.
Me?
Whoever the fuck
Uh,
wants to have an
I'm gonna
opinion.
say-
Surprisingly,
say-
you would be surprised to find out that even though it's labeled the last season,
It is
not.
not the last season.
Wait,
Oh
okay,
my
okay. I'm gonna really
God.
quickly wrap this up now.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. No one knew today, so we don't have to. Wait, Keenan, you did the thing where I asked your favorite thing. to do on
No,
the
shut
beach,
up,
right?
shut up.
You gotta ask
No,
me
we
now.
did it. We did it.
Wait,
No.
okay.
His
Keenan,
favorite.
Keenan, what do you like to do on the beach?
What I like to do on the beach?
Yeah,
I like to dip my toes in the water.
I think
Just
that's
sit
like
there.
nearly what someone else said. Anyway,
I know, but
Probably
okay, wait,
Keenan.
Hold on. So if you walk up to where like the sand's all mushy and you just like pivot your feet over and over again, you'll slowly like sink into the sand
that
until
is
you're like
how-
knee deep in sand.
That is how
What kind of
sand
beaches
works.
are you going to that isn't just rocks? Please inform
Like
me.
most beaches. What
Most
beaches
beaches-
are you? Okay. Anyway.
The only
End the
that is it
episode.
for
End the
Coastside
episode.
Chats. Let's
End the
go.
episode.